I think I'll go ahead and get us started because we've got an action-packed agenda. So thanks for joining us for some great talks ahead on critters. Our first speaker is Tim Duclos. Tim is a native Vermonter, holding a Bachelor's of Science in Wildlife Biology from UVM and a Master's of Science in Conservation Ecology from UMass Amherst. He has worked extensively in the field of ecology, from public education to forest management to scientific research. For his graduate work, he conducted research with the Forest Service Northern Forest Research Station and the USGS Climate Adaptation Science Center, studying the effects of climate change and forest structure on birds in the White Mountains. Tim is currently with Audubon Vermont in a role seeking to advance long-term forest conservation and the application of principles of ecological forestry framed through the lens of birds among both natural resource professionals and private landowners. So I'll let Tim take it from here. Thanks, Tim.
Well, thank you, Caitlin, and thank you, NESAF, for having me here. This is quite a privilege and opportunity to be able to speak to you today about the Foresters for the Birds program, where we've been at and where we're going. And certainly this morning's plenary session, I felt like really inspired me, and I think really kind of set me up for this talk, because so much of what we talked about this morning directly aligns with what I'm going to be talking with you about right now. So to begin, I actually am going to do a little audience participation. So this is New England. How many folks in the room are from Vermont or work in Vermont? Okay, cool. Awesome. New Hampshire? Maine? Rhode Island? Yeah, Rhode Island. Connecticut? A couple from Connecticut. Massachusetts? Sweet. Okay. Did I miss any New England states? No? Okay, good. Next question. How many folks in the room have heard of Foresters for the Birds? Oh, hell, I should take a photo of that. Sorry, I just swore. Heck yeah. Okay, awesome. How many folks have taken our trainings before? Okay, my boss would love that. Okay, so thank you for that. As Caitlin said, I work for Audubon Vermont and the National Audubon Society. I'm going to be talking about who Audubon is, National Audubon Society. I'm going to really pitch to you our stake in forest management so that you can leave here kind of a better understanding of why Audubon cares so much about private forest land management. I'm going to be giving you a history and a primer on Foresters for the Birds 1.0 so that you understand where we're coming from and what we've done before. And then talk about where we're at in terms of thinking about the next chapter of Foresters for the Birds. This next chapter really is encapsulated in what we're calling our Forester Training and Endorsement Program. Hopefully all of you will leave with an understanding of how you can become involved. I will say that the program I'm talking about has presence in all New England states. However, Audubon really only administers this program, the one I'm going to talk about today, in Vermont, New York, and Connecticut. But I think that this is going to be relevant for all of you. And then I'm going to have some space at the end, where we can have some Q&A. So as I mentioned, I work for the National Audubon Society, which is a national organization. We have over 750 employees and state chapters in something like 17 states. Vermont is one of those states. And so that differentiates the organization I work for here in Vermont from, let's say, like Mass Audubon or New Hampshire Audubon or Maine Audubon. Those are kind of independent entities. We collaborate, but ultimately I'm beholden to a larger organization. We have multiple strategic initiatives, and one of them is our Working Lands Initiative, which is the umbrella of the program I work under rather, in the state of Vermont, which is our Healthy Forest program. The mission of Audubon is to protect the birds and the places they need today and tomorrow, and much of the work that I am going to be talking about is about protecting the places they need today and tomorrow. Here in Vermont, our Healthy Forest program really closely aligns with so much of the work that our partners do, so much of what we have already heard about today. We think a lot about Vermont conservation design. I'm proud of my state and the level of thinking and collaboration that we've put towards our, maintaining an ecologically intact, integral landscape. And our work really aligns with that. So our basic principles are keeping forests as forest across the landscape. We think strategically about how to maintain these forests in large, intact forest blocks and having these blocks connected across the landscape. To do this work, it takes a multifaceted approach. We work with land managers, resource managers, including foresters such as yourselves. We do some analysis of management plans on public lands, and do comments and kind of look at how we're managing lands across the state and all kinds of designations. And we work with private landowners as well in thinking about this. And the work we do really does align with, in many ways, supporting a working landscape. Now, the power of birds is pretty significant, and I kind of picked up on this in my undergrad years, in that it's you look at the jobs that exist, you look at kind of the work that's being designed on the landscape. So much of the conversation is about birds, and it's for good reason, because the rich bird community that exists out there really does, well, I'm kind of cutting to the chase here, but it really does tell the story of the diversity of forest conditions, or beyond forest, just the ecological conditions that exist on the landscape. So you very well can use birds as a readily available, observable indicator of forest health, ecosystem health and function. When you're working with the public stakeholders, private landowners, birds are also like a very compelling and charismatic group. When you start talking about the benefits of the work on private lands or any forest, and you talk about it in terms of birds, people start to listen. And the foresters we work with do tell us that the landowners themselves become more receptive to thinking about active management when you talk about the benefit it's going to have on the ecosystem, birds specifically. And it really all kind of falls under the umbrella of ecological forestry, and it brings a lot of co-benefits too. My brand is birds, but when I'm talking about birds and these principles, it brings with it climate change resiliency concepts. It increases, in many cases, carbon sequestration and storage. And as I already mentioned, in many ways, can align with objectives of maintaining a working landscape and producing forest products. Vermont, and really the northern forest, New England, is tremendously important for breeding birds. What you're seeing here is data from North America's longest term research study, the Breeding Bird Survey. And this heat map really, it displays the abundance, or really the diversity of birds that have been measured at a 5-kilometer scale. And you can just see that the northern Appalachians, or all of the Appalachians, are pretty hot. Vermont itself has upwards of 80 bird species that occupy some type of forested habitat. We have 40 birds that are critically dependent upon forest here in the Northeast. So Vermont really is a breeding factory for birds and contributes to birds, continentally and globally, really, given that some of our birds migrate to South America and pretty far. As I already mentioned, the diversity of bird species that exist in the forest is a direct correlative, or mirror, or reflection rather, of the richness of forest bird habitat. Principally, I don't have a slide kind of talking about the principles that we advocate for, but suffice to say, structural complexity. So, maintaining across a forested parcel, across the landscape, a variety of different forest conditions, forest types, making sure that we have understory vegetation, regeneration, some mid-story structure, some overstory structure. And really, I think a lot about how we can kind of restore our forests to, let's say, older forest conditions, the conditions that existed on the landscape before we cut all the forests down in the 19th century. And in alignment with Vermont conservation design, we also advocate for a component of the landscape being retained as regenerating young forest, generally about 3 to 5%. So we do look at the landscape, and we wonder, how much young forest exists on that landscape as well, because there are different group of birds in and of themselves that are quite imperiled that need young forest, early successional habitat. And as I already mentioned, we want this all in a connected, intact landscape. But what we really don't want is uniformity, monocultures, and forest loss and fragmentation. At the end of the day, that's what we don't want. Only one slide on the bird decline. There's a lot to be said here, but suffice to say, our birds are declining quite rapidly, including our eastern forest birds and particularly our insectivorous birds. So all of this really drives at the need to think about this issue very seriously. And to kind of put this all together, eastern forest birds are declining, and we know from the science that the condition of our forests, which are relatively young, even-aged across the landscape, given that they're still recovering from wide-scale deforestation, they need a much more complex forest structure across that landscape. So Audubon very much has an interest in how forests are managed. When you look at Vermont in particular and realizing that 80% of our forested landscape is privately owned, it then really means that we need to be effective in working with private landowners in managing these forests in ways that are going to be of benefit to birds, but also all the other co-benefits. And this kind of case really drives what I'm about to talk about, which is foresters for the birds. And so about 16 years ago, Steve Hagenbu and partners really kind of went out on a pier here and developed kind of a first of its kind, shall I say, a program that we coined the Foresters for the Birds program that integrated the concepts of ecological forestry that are framed in terms of birds and bird habitat needs, and trying to deploy that on private lands by both training foresters in these concepts so that they could bring these concepts to their landowners, but also working with landowners themselves to train them and educate them on how to be good stewards of the woods and the importance of their forests for birds. So from there, we held a whole series of trainings across the state for foresters. We had well over 120 foresters come out and attend these trainings. We established a whole series of demonstration harvests across the state to show this work in action. We have since heard a lot of discussions at various consulting forestry meetings or at meetings like this about managing for birds. I mean, we heard several references to managing forests for birds just this morning in the plenary session. And I see it mentioned on people's websites too, that this is a service they offer their landowners. Also in collaboration with over 100 foresters, Forest Parks and Recreation, who are key partners in the development of the Foresters for the Birds program, a series of guides were designed, one for foresters, one for landowners, and a couple just various texts that really encapsulated these principles and delivered it to a variety of different folks. And the Foresters for the Birds model really spread like wildfire across the Northeast and now across North America. I mean, there's like a dozen different states where there are present some form of a Foresters for the Birds program. The Forest Stewards Guild has really run with this. All New England states have some form of the Foresters for the Birds program. So clearly, quite a lot of success in the first 16 years of this program. A lot of things to be really inspired by. And I should also say that on the landowner front, Audubon has seen a lot of success in ourselves doing these one-on-one assessments with landowners. We'll go out and walk the property with a landowner, talk about their values, and we'll kind of interpret the forest conditions relative to birds for them. And then we write all this up into an assessment for them. And then we give that to their forester, and we offer opportunity to see how they can integrate that into their forest management planning. And we've worked with up to 174 landowners, and it continues to be pretty successful. We've kind of branded this under our Woods, Wildlife, and Warblers program at this point. But what remains is tracking the outcome. Understandably, my boss wants to know, how many acres on the ground? How many harvests have happened? What is the degree to which this has been applied? And in fact, just this morning, Caitlin Littlefield said exactly that. We talk a lot about ecological forestry, but we don't know how much to what degree it's being applied. And so this is where Foresters for the Birds 2.0 has come in. And so we're thinking about how do we continue to train foresters in these concepts, but also continue to engage with those foresters to see, to continue to learn to what degree it's being applied, so that we can understand truly how, effective we're being, and also how we can continue to be relevant and impactful. Foresters are the ones that are meeting with landowners. They're the ones that are making the plans, doing the inventories, making the plans, seeing the harvest through. And so it really makes sense that we continue to work with our foresters, as ambassadors in applying these principles. And so the vision for this is we train foresters. We then have kind of a series of ways to evaluate their competency in these principles. And then we just let them go do their work with their landowners per usual. Then we're building systems to allow for foresters to report back to us on a at least annual basis on the outcome of that. Like, how many landowners have you worked with? How many forest management plans have you written that apply these principles? How many acres on the ground of implementation has happened? What more do you need from me? What do landowners care about? Like, what's the problem on the ground that I really need to help all of us overcome? And we hope that there's a lot of enduring value in this program for foresters. For example, we're working with SAF to ensure that there's credits that can be awarded for the trainings, continue education opportunities. I've heard from multiple foresters, including Caitlin herself, who's one of our endorsed foresters, our first in the world, that, just kind of framing forestry in the light of birds kind of just expands knowledge and stimulates just continued interest, or it's a new angle at which to think about the work that is being done in the woods, right? And as I already mentioned, landowners seem very receptive to this and interested in this. And therefore, I think, and what I'm seeing is that very well, working with Audubon to incorporate bird-friendly silvicultural practices into private land management could increase the impact, the willingness of landowners to undertake some management or action. We also come by funds sometimes that we can distribute through our foresters. Just yesterday, I was on a project up in the Cold Haul to Canada region that we've set up for a woodlots participant up there through the forester, and we were implementing a harvest at no cost to that landowner. And so very well we can support the work that you do. And I'm also aware that states like Massachusetts, for example, have built mechanisms to finance foresters in incorporating these concepts into the management planning that they do for landowners. All of this is very much, this new 2.0 is in the planning phase, and I'm very much working through it and figuring out how to make it work. And so part of this is also just getting a lot of feedback from you to tell me how I can make this work for all of us. Because I dare say we all can align with these interests and values. And it's a matter of how we can make the rubber meet the road. So far, the process is pretty straightforward. And you can do it all online. We've got a series of training videos that you can watch on YouTube. Each is an hour long, so that's like 4 hours of your time to watch these videos. If you go to Audubon Vermont's website, you can use this QR code if you want. We've got a whole web page on the Forester Training Endorsement Program. So does New York. New York's website also captures the same process for Connecticut foresters. So you can watch these videos. Each video has like a little mini quiz at the end that you just respond to and send your responses to me. We also have a scenario exercise, prescription scenario we ask you to respond to. And then we ask for 2 example forest management plans that demonstrate the application of our principles. It's a bit like a peer review process where you send your plans to me, myself and Steve Hagenbu look at them, and we kind of provide some edits and feedback. if warranted, and then we have a conversation and see how we can land on something that seems like it satisfies both parties. And that's really it so far. We just want you to be able to go through these trainings, demonstrate that you have captured the concepts, and then we release you to go do your good work as you already are doing. We're also going to do an in-person training at Merck Forest and Farmland Center down in southwestern Vermont. It's where I worked before coming to Audubon. So it's a great space, 3,000 plus acres. I wrote their management plan with using silviculture with birds in mind, so there's a lot to look at down there. I haven't set up registration yet, but if you email me, if you're interested, please just email me and I'll get your name on a list and I can pass that information on to you once we get registration set. We're also going to host a training down in Connecticut for folks that are closer to that part of the world, this being at Yale's Myers Forest, and my colleague down there, Rosa Goldman, is going to be hosting that training, so you can email her if you're interested. And again, this is for, we haven't extended this program to states beyond Vermont, New York, and Connecticut, but there are programs like this in all New England states. So what I'm talking about right now, unfortunately, I guess, is largely for folks working in New York, Vermont, and Connecticut. And again, just to kind of wrap up here, our expectations right now are quite simple and straightforward. Basically, we will reach out to you in the springtime and ask you for a simple report on your activities, how many management plans you've written, how many acres on the ground, and over time, what harvest and implementation has happened. We might ask for an example forest management plan. I might very selfishly ask to go out in the field with you so I can get away from my computer, and see your work in action. But right now, again, the bottom line is we want to see this work implemented on private lands. We know it's being implemented. We know that folks are taking into consideration birds and ecology, ecological forestry, and we just simply want to know the impact and how we can continue to engage in private lands through foresters in doing this work. And again, we're going to offer continuing education opportunities for me to present to our foresters about upcoming and novel research and findings as it relates to bird-friendly forestry, ecology. I also see this as an opportunity to gather feedback too. So I envision a system or a program where our endorsed foresters can connect with each other, share stories, share resources, knowledge, and keep this conversation going about what it means to apply this work on the ground. In Vermont, it just makes sense to kind of align this reporting with the UVA. So if you're already reporting to the state of Vermont on management plans, hopefully it's just as simple as to report to us as well how many of those management plans align with our program principles. Same with implementation. Looks like I'm more or less right on time, which is great. So I just want to, as I wrap up here and leave plenty of space for some questions, I want to recognize our partners and our funders. And I totally encourage you to follow up by checking out our website, find out more information about our endorsement program, possibly even go through the process yourself and get set up with us. So with that, I will yield the floor and open it up to any questions that you may have, and I'll do my best to answer those questions. So thank you so much for your time and attention. Oh, I'll try to repeat the questions. Yes. Our first question.
I work mostly in New Hampshire, but a little bit in Vermont, and I'm going to ask this question because I feel like I should know, but I know New Hampshire talked about having a forestry for the birds program, but I don't know of one. So what am I missing?
New Hampshire is the one state that I hear. Oh, I'm supposed to repeat the question. Okay, so New Hampshire, what's going on in New Hampshire, right? So we've heard word that New Hampshire has a Foresters for the Birds program, but seems like supporting information isn't there. That's what I can say as well. Like there's a million things I could be doing more, but one is having a conversation with New Hampshire, because forgive me, but I can just say back to you what you said to me, which is I know that they are interested in applying this, but I don't know of any silvicultural guides or, you know, stuff on paper that supports it. So let's both, yeah.
I work with New Hampshire Audubon, and there was talk
Yeah.
a few years ago, but I would love to be able to participate. I mean, I reference Vermont's program all the time. It just seems like there's a lot of folks that are ready in New Hampshire and just need the program.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot of power in using the guides from Maine, New Hampshire, you know, northern hardwood forest, like it translates, right? So that all that is there to support you, but it's of course really nice to be able to align your work with a organized program, right? So I'll take that, and when I have an opportunity to talk to folks in New Hampshire, I'll bring that up. Yes.
So you were talking about one of your goals is more old forest conditions.
Mm-hmm.
In a practical manner, how big a piece, not on a percentage basis, but I mean, is an acre of that accomplish anything? 5, 10? What would you say is kind of like a minimum threshold to really do good?
That is a great question. So the question is, at what scale do we need to apply, you know, like ecological silviculture towards old forest conditions? Basically, it's like, you know, would trying to get old forest on 1 acre be sufficient, or does it need to be larger? I would say that there's value in thinking about forest complexity, the need for structure, species, diversity at any scale, which kind of, and really thinking about how disturbances influence forest structure, and how you can go about forestry in ways to mimic that. But ecologically, you know, 1 acre island of just like a patch of forest is functionally not very great, because, you know, like a lot of these birds are very edge sensitive. They need like intact interior forests. I can't put an exact number on it, but I mean, you're talking hopefully like, you know, hundreds of acres, thousands of acres together possible, but you're not going to be managing across all those thousands of acres, but this gets complicated. Basically, hopefully, how do I say this? I think there's value in applying it at any scale, but functionally 1 acre alone isn't going to offer a lot for birds. But, you know, once you get larger and larger scale, 25, 50 acres, there's going to be increased value of birds. But hopefully that 25, 50 acres isn't ever just an island. It's bigger. It's part of a much bigger, the hundreds, the thousands of acres I just said, forest block. Does that make sense?
It does, well, I just want to follow up on that. When you say hundreds, thousands of acre
Yeah.
block, do you mean forest in general or old forest condition with that 50 acres in the middle?
Forest in general.
Forest in general.
Yeah. I mean, there's value in any forest cover type, you know, but it increases in value when you add complexity to it. But yeah, so you don't have to, I wouldn't expect us to manage all forest in forest interior blocks. They don't all need to be managed as old forest conditions for one individual parcel to matter. I think I kind of, yeah. This is a good question, yeah. Tim? One more question. Tim, you get the last one.
Tim, so I was a recipient of one of your bird habitat assessments from last spring, which was excellent. It gave us a whole different perspective. We have 200 acres and a goal of 23,000 acres, 2,300 acres. So it gave us a totally different perspective. My question to you is, what parameters would you use for evaluating the success of the program? So these bird habitat assessments 5 years, what parameters, we've got 73 species of birds on our property. What parameters beyond that would you look at to evaluate success?
Yeah, that's great questions. Tim is asking, having received one of my assessments, how, let's say in 5 years, I would evaluate, measure success. Well, I think that there's success right up front in having you as a landowner engaged in this, having had you out talking with me, putting some thinking towards the value of value of your woods beyond just land, just beyond timber. But from there, a measure of success is demonstrate intentionality towards at least maintaining your forest as forests, and where opportunity exists, implementing efforts to improve those forests. So in 5 years, if I go back, and we'll go back and see that you've implemented some of the prescriptions that your foresters have made that align with our program principles, see more regeneration in the sugar bush, some gaps in there, that would be an additional measure of success. So it's education and awareness to begin, it's establishing intentionality, and then it's hopefully seeing implementation of practices that serve to improve the forest. Yeah. Thank you all so much. Yeah, thank you, Caitlin.